Hey there and welcome to Concierge Medicine Radio, your source for actionable advice and real stories of physicians running and growing concierge practices. For more interviews and notes on today's show, please visit conciergemedicineradio.com and enter your email. Now, let's join your host, Taylor Pearson.
Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of Concierge Medicine Radio. We're joined today by the publishers and editors of Concierge Medicine Today and the Direct Primary Care Journal. So I have with me Catherine Sykes, the managing editor of both trade journals. Catherine is a healthcare entrepreneur, an author, a media spokesperson, and an expert in identifying growing and emerging healthcare markets. I've also got Michael Tetreault on the line. Michael is the editor-in-chief of Concierge Medicine Today and the Direct Primary Care Journal. He's one of the most widely recognized and respected resources in both spaces, and both Catherine and Michael together have created these industry trade publications and written several books and consumer guides. So, Catherine and Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Taylor. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So give us a brief 2 or 3 minute background about yourselves and Concierge Medicine Today and the Direct Primary Care Journal, just to give people some context.
Sure. Well, we started the Concierge Medicine Today publication and its sister publication, the Direct Primary Care Journal. They're both two separate publications with two different audiences. Several years ago, I believe back in 2007, but prior to that, in about 2005, Catherine and I have been working together for several years prior to that, and just saw that there was an emerging healthcare trend, as we have backgrounds in healthcare, in the concierge care delivery model. And so we started learning and investigating and learning from the physicians out there and the groups that were operating. And our mission back then is still the same mission that we have now, which is to be a single source of truth about this emerging healthcare delivery model and how it can be very affordable for the consumers out there, and how it can also change drastically the physician-patient relationship inside of primary care, family medicine, and specialty types of doctors' offices across America. So we started Concierge Medicine Today, and we have, the largest white paper library archive. We put out all of the news stories, good and bad, about the industry. We cover trends. We also started the Concierge Medicine Research Collective shortly thereafter, and started asking and surveying and working with universities and medical hospitals, and asking the real questions that consumers and doctors, as well as hospital systems and insurance companies, wanted to know, like, how many minutes do I actually get to spend with the concierge doctor versus, just a traditional hamster wheel type of medical practice. And so we have, a large, vast resource in polling data, surveys that we've conducted over the years with all of those types of, universities, schools, other types of endeavors. And then shortly, we also created the Direct Primary Care Journal, because we saw the direct primary care business model was a cousin of concierge medicine, different in several ways, but that it needed its own brand and it needed its own level of distinction. And so we then, because we were actually approached and asked by several physicians that are key leaders out in there to start this independent journal, the DPC journal, that is. And so we remain independent, and that is pretty much how we got started.
And so go into that a little more, because I know there's not really a consensus right now on how you would split up concierge medicine and direct primary care. So how would you define, or how would you differentiate between the two?
Well, I like to, as I tell a lot of people, I think that their concierge medicine and direct primary care are part of the same family, but they're not brother and sister. They're mainly, we see them as cousins, part of the same family. And direct primary care is really differentiated. And we've done, several interviews, and we've asked, doctors and opinion leaders and, business experts as well as, even attorneys, the question, what do you think differentiates DPC from concierge care? And when you boil it all down and you take all of that summary and download all of that information at the end of the day, it's really boiled down to about 4 different things. There's a price point, which is fairly close to what concierge care is. We find that 62% through the surveys and interviews and polling through our publications, we found that about 62% of all concierge medicine as well as direct primary care plans cost less than $135 a month. And we all have cell phone bills and probably cable bills that are either more than that or relatively close to that price. So price point is one way that direct primary care differentiates itself. We see that direct primary care practices are typically age band in that they cost around $50 to $100 per month, and that in itself is a difference because most of the direct primary care plans out there operate on a monthly basis versus a retainer basis like concierge care, where a lot of concierge care practices are billed by the doctors to their patients either quarterly or annually. And then another thing that differentiates DPC from concierge is that it's age of consumer. We found that a lot of the demographics inside of direct primary care practices are relatively young. They're between the ages of 30 and 50. Now, that's not to say that concierge care does not have that demographic, but the majority of people who utilize concierge medicine in its retainer form are typically age 50 to 65. Now, so those are the 2 ways in which DPC is different. The other 2 ways is insurance participation and the patient panel. A lot of direct primary care practices still do not accept insurance, and they just do direct pay or cash type of services for the doctor's time and the doctor's services that they provide in the office. And then the last one, the 4th one, is the patient panel size. Most retainer-based and concierge care type of practices limit their practice to around 600 to as low as 300, and we've seen lower, obviously. But a lot of direct primary care practices, as differentiating themselves, have panels between 750 and 1,200.
I would also like to add to that you can also see a services differentiation as well. The level of personal contact and access, 24/7 access, and the other perks that concierge doctors build into their practices to have a more hands-on approach and touch with their patients versus the DPC, which still has the longer appointments, generally speaking, and the time with the physician, but yet may be a little more distanced in terms of access.
So when you say a little more distance in terms of access, could you give us an example or 2 of services you often see concierge offer but not DPC?
Well, I think that with concierge services, generally speaking, the patient would have the doctor's cell phone number, would be able to contact that doctor 24/7 if there were any issues that came up, and a number of DPC services still use an answering service or may have someone other than themselves answer the calls. They may be in a multi-doctor practice and have another doctor on call, so they may not have as direct an access to their doctor at a given time, which is a little bit different than a concierge practice. Now, some DPC practices do add in a concierge philosophy to their practice approach, which does afford more direct access with the doctor, texting and emailing and that sort of thing. But many of them will use a nurse practitioner to help field calls and that sort of thing, which you don't see as much in the concierge market.
And also a lot inside of DPC practices, inside of concierge care practices, we see a lot more included services like lab tests, maybe some x-rays, they might even throw in a CAT scan once a year. The physicals might be more exhaustive. There might be more testing that's included inside of the fee. And then you're getting up into some higher, above $135 per month ranges when you start to include some of those things. But for the most part, a lot of direct primary care doctors, as well as concierge care doctors, we find, and we're seeing a lot of this, are going out to their local clinics, their local laboratories that they have in their local areas and saying, how much can you, do an x-ray for if I can't do it in my office? Or how much can you do a urinalysis for, or an MRI? There was an example here in Atlanta where a doctor said, I asked the local clinic down the road, and they have a CAT scan machine. How much could they do it for if I gave them cash? And they said, well, look, we can get your patient in for $150.
Significantly lower.
It's amazing the difference, the people I've talked to, when you can approach those people and say, I can pay cash up front. It's a whole different conversation than, for example, when insurances approach them.
Absolutely.
Well, what I kind of want to dig into with this interview is, because you are kind of an independent organization, I think you're going to have a better 50,000-foot view of the movement, both concierge and direct primary care. So what's the most common question the two of you get from concierge and DPC physicians?
Well, I see that the number one question that we have that comes from doctors is, or from curious physicians. That is, those doctors who are thinking about moving into this space. And that is, how hard is this to do? And we're not consultants. We are news and information resources out there. And that is our purpose and our mission out there, is to be an advocate and a public relations media spokesperson for this industry. And so we see a lot of curious physicians asking us the type of questions. I just don't know how to do this because it seems really complex. I know that I have to make a change because I can't stay on this hamster wheel anymore. What should I do? Who should I talk to? What are some things I should know before doing this? And one of the most common ways in which a doctor should evaluate whether or not they should move into this is spousal support, and not in the way that we think about it, but in the way that, happy wife, happy life. If your spouse, if you're entertaining this idea of a new business model and you discuss it with your spouse, and your spouse for the next 6 months just isn't really on board, then it's not time for you to move into this just yet. And so that's one of the barriers to entry that we see among a lot of curious physicians. As far as other types of currently practicing DPC and concierge medicine doctors, the question that we have that comes up, I would say, the most is, they're always interested in legal opinions about the ACA and the impact on their practice models. And that's one of them. Another issue or topic that we see trending a lot is, working with insurance companies and working with employers in their local area. How do I contact local employers and make my practice, appealing to employer health plans, or my local small business, down the road? So those are some of the more common questions that we see. And then from consumers who are, because we have probably the largest database with internal and external of physicians for consumers wanting to search out and find a doctor and get connected and plug in with one of these types of practices through our websites. And the consumers, when they call us, they'll ask, what do I need to know? What should I ask these types of doctors? Because I'm not really familiar. Does it cost as much as I think it does? And, because what they hear, what the consumer, the prospective patient hears is they hear what the media is telling them, and they hear what television tells them. And this is not, television medical care. This is much different. It's much more affordable. What's interesting is there's actually more patient demand from our data that we see internally. There's more people seeking and trying to locate and trying to find these types of doctors than there are doctors to actually service them across the U.S.
I wanted to go back to what you said about spousal support. I think that's something I've learned that I see with businesses I work in, and not actually in spouses, but in business partners, that people often will go into partnerships with someone because it seems to make economic sense, and they neglect to talk about the emotional aspect of it, which plays such a critical role. As to what you said about the Affordable Care Act, what is your opinion? Like, what do you think that's going to do to the concierge and DPC market? How's that going to impact it?
Well, the ACA has actually, looked at its cousin, direct primary care, quite closely, and we're very plugged in with a lot of the lobbyist organizations who are in this market, and we I think I just talked to them a couple of days ago, and they were telling us, overall, the ACA has recognized concierge medicine's cousin, direct primary care, as a viable non-insurance medical offering as part of the inside of the ACA language. And I think the rub comes where when people don't understand that these are not insurance plans. This is a doctor offering access-based services to be able to have a better relationship with you, the patient. And so I think that we'll start seeing, and Catherine might want to touch on this, that we're going to start seeing more and more consumers be magnetized to these types of practices because they're very affordable and they're very transparent. And the doctors, the medical industry as a whole in the U.S. is one of the very last industries in business to finally tell their customers how much things cost. And the consumers out there are loving that because they're finally saying, it doesn't cost $850 towards my deductible to go get an MRI. I can actually get it done for cash for $400. And so we're seeing a lot of patient demand, and I think that'll continue to grow.
And do you think it's going to grow equally for concierge and direct primary care, or do you think it'll slant one way or the other, or how will that break up? And I guess another way to look at that question is, let's say you had to make a prediction for what the U.S. healthcare ecosystem looks like in 5 years. What do you think the breakdown is?
Well, I think that definitely there is a surge in retail, doc-in-a-box, and looking for alternative means by which patients are accessing healthcare. And so in 5 years, I think that the DPC and concierge models will both have their respective places within the system. I think that we will certainly see a growth in these forms of healthcare. As Michael indicated, between 20 to 30% of consumers are probably going to be looking and seeking out these types of relationship-based healthcare relationships with physicians. And so we see it continuing to grow. Direct primary care is certainly coming up quickly as a model that physicians tend to look at and feel more comfortable with than a concierge model. The direct primary care has a broader-based demographic appeal, and so doctors feel that, with these lower monthly fees, that the majority or many of their patients can afford these types of monthly access fees, and therefore, because of the way that the program is structured, the appeal to the market, I think, is going to continue to increase. How that percentage is actually going to play out between concierge and DPC, I think it's still going to continue to evolve even more over the next 5 years. I think that DPC, we're going to see certain kinds of models and breakdowns of what comes under the umbrella of DPC, but we'll have those that accept insurance, those that don't, and those are going to become further and further apart and distinguished as standing models under the DPC umbrella. And with concierge, I think that concierge is going to, the lower cost concierge programs may begin to look more like DPC, whereas the mid-range and higher cost concierge programs are probably going to continue to add on services and added value services in order to reach a different market.
Yeah, I was talking with my dad and sister yesterday. We were talking before the interview a bit. I mentioned my dad and sister are both physicians. They're in the process of transitioning and setting up a concierge clinic or direct pay clinic. And my dad was saying, everything that comes through in the news that's bad for healthcare, bad for consumers about healthcare, in a way, is this benefit for concierge or direct primary care, just because it's going to make people more acutely aware as the service level deteriorates of what the problems are, and as people start looking for alternatives, as consumers are looking for better solutions. Direct primary care and concierge medicine are really the clear places to turn to. Do you see specialists playing into the picture? So both in concierge and obviously in direct primary care, the majority of physicians are primary care physicians. Is this something that 5 years from now a significant portion of specialists will be doing as well, or do you think this is going to remain pretty exclusive to primary care?
No, specialists are already getting involved in these types of business models. We see cardiologists, pediatrics, dentists, urologists, surgery. We get contacted by all different types and levels of specialists who are evaluating how to structure a DPC or concierge product model. And so we see that definitely increasing as time goes on. It makes sense for them, particularly when you're dealing with chronic conditions like pulmonologists do with asthma and some of the other, where they have a long-term patient base, even cardiologists. So these types of business models are gaining appeal within the specialty medical markets, and so we see them definitely being a player in this system and coming up pretty strongly in the years ahead.
So walk us through then, for example, what do you think, or if you've talked with someone that's already doing it, what does a urology concierge medicine practice look like?
Well, I think that, we probably, concierge medicine and the doctors who are already existing and doing this can really learn a lot from the dermatology types of practices and how those anti-aging type of specialty practices are operating. They're very transparent, and there are things that are not covered by insurance, and there are things that are, and they don't have a problem listing what those fees are. They're not secretive about those fees. They're very transparent, and they try to make special offers available to their patients. I think that we'll continue to see a lot more transparency in pricing and a lot more listing of doctors' pricings in these types of practices. It's always easier to go out when you're, starting a new business or a new practice, as you probably know, that, you want to learn who out there is doing it rather than having to try and go and reinvent the wheel. And dermatology has definitely done a good job of marketing. They've done a good job of attracting patients. They've done a good job of retaining their patients and keeping them satisfied. So if concierge doctors, in primary care and family medicine, which the majority of concierge care doctors are in those types of medical practices, if they can accomplish those types of things, keeping their prices transparent and, offering special deals and special offers to their patients, I think that they'll be set up very well for the future to have a long future in this medical space.
But what kind of services are they going to offer? So I'm picking urology here because my father's urologist, so that's the one I've got the most knowledge about. But he's not going to be doing surgery. What kind of service offerings are you seeing from specialists? Is it retainers for people with chronic conditions? Is it, I'm going to riff on the urology one here, but is it, hormone therapy? Is it like some kind of anti-aging? What does that actually look like?
Anti-aging, the concierge medicine side of anti-aging is very popular. And if you want to, we have a primary care doctor out in California a few months ago. On average, how many patients do you see out of your panel of, let's say, 500-600 patients? How often do you get that one individual to come into your office each year. And she said, I have a hard time getting my patients to come in one time per year. Since I have added anti-aging types of solutions, and I don't know all the details of that, I'd have to go and look at a list of those types of value-added type of services that they're adding, which is very easy to do. But she is able to see her patients on her panel anywhere between 2 and 3 times per year. So you can see that you've just now gone from a touch point of 1, I see that patient 1 time per year, to about 2 to 3 times per year. That helps build that retention. So adding those anti-aging types of solutions has been very popular among concierge care practices throughout the last 2 years.
Interesting. So she's bringing people more into the clinic, and obviously then adding a lot more value through that anti-aging service. And she's a primary care physician, you said?
Yes.
Well, let me kind of take a pivot then. From the people you've talked to and the practices you've observed, what are some of the most common mistakes you see people transitioning into concierge and direct primary care make?
I'll take that one to begin with, Michael. I think that one of the most common mistakes that we see is that physicians don't plan out a strategic transition. And so they think that they've got a group of patients that are just going to transition because of the relationship, and they take for granted that these patients are going to understand and buy into this new model. They don't have their messaging down in a way that the patients can necessarily understand, and they think that they can oftentimes do it by themselves without bringing in support to help them during the transition process. And I think that overall that's probably one of the greatest mistakes that we see commonly among physicians who introduced or made an announcement to their patient base, got some pushback because the messaging wasn't good or it wasn't handled well, and then they're concerned about proceeding, and now they're getting double-minded and ambivalent about moving forward, and then confusion comes in. People don't understand, their patients don't necessarily understand why the doctor is doing what he's doing, and therefore they get concerned and may start looking for other physicians in the community. And so I think that not having a good plan and not having the professional support to help a physician through the transition process are probably the biggest mistakes that we see. Michael?
So, Catherine, when people get in touch with Concierge Medicine Today or the Direct Primary Care Journal, do you generally refer them to a consultant in that case?
No, not necessarily. It's dependent upon the questions that arise. We have a number of questions that are fairly consistent that doctors ask when they call. But in terms of actually helping a doctor, or when a doctor calls and says, I'm going to be transitioning my practice, and I am not sure the best way to proceed, then we generally do recommend that they get professional support around them. That may include developing a relationship with an attorney who has expertise in this space, making sure that their accountant understands how billing will happen and how that process will work. Maybe having a marketing professional that can assist them with the messaging and the communications, or a consultant who can handle all of these things. So really each case is a little different, and some doctors do well and are marketing-oriented, very patient-sensitive, and can communicate well with their patients the reasons why they are doing this. But getting that professional or getting that expertise built into their plan as they're staging out the phases of their transition, I think is just a very important aspect of being successful.
And on the flip side of successful, what does failure look like? So, for example, you have a a physician that tries to make the transition, and my experience has been similar to what you said, which is people either bring in a consultant that handles kind of soup to nuts and does everything, or they put together the separate pieces with a marketing professional and a local attorney they trust. But let's say someone does try and make this transition. They send a letter out to all their patients, and it doesn't go as well as they plan. What do people generally do?
Well, I'll give you an example. There was a physician that we had met a number of years back who was considering transitioning and had made a plan to transition. He knew how to communicate, or felt he knew how to communicate. He did not want any professional support around him necessarily. And so he announced that he was going to be converting his practice to a concierge model. And the way that he communicated it was with a 3-page diatribe against the insurance companies and managed care. Not talking about the benefits to the patient and all of those kinds of things that help a patient decide whether or not this is for me or not, and really just went on this diatribe. Well, of course, you and I both know from a marketing perspective that you send that kind of communication after about the second paragraph, you've lost them, and they don't even necessarily complete reading the entire document. And so what happened was he went and he did not set a defined date for patients to make a decision. He didn't have a transition cutoff, if you will. So a lot of the fence sitters in his practice decided that they would just wait and see what happened and not make a decision to participate in the concierge practice until they were forced to make a decision. And so what ended up happening was his transition went on and on and on. A number of patients, a few came into his concierge practice. When he saw that not a lot were coming in, he kind of panicked, so he announced that he was going to continue a hybrid model, which included him seeing patients under the old fee-for-service model, and so he was providing services on both sides. Well, the concierge patients felt that they were not getting the level of service that they were promised, and the patients that were on the fee-for-service side felt like, well, nothing's changed and it's the same as always, and the concierge people didn't necessarily have the access like they were promised because there were still so many fee-for-care patients. Anyway, to make a long story short, it became very, very difficult for him to transition into concierge because the patients didn't see a benefit to it. The fee-for-care or fee-for-service patients saw that they got to see the doctor anyway. The concierge patients felt like they were not being treated, that they could just go back to being a fee-for-service patient and still get to see the doctor. And so because of the way it was mismanaged, he ended up pulling the concierge piece, pulling it back, and he lost a number of patients through that process who got concerned. They didn't understand necessarily the concierge side of the business, so they weren't ready to make a commitment, but they realized that they'd have to change, make some sort of decision, so they decided to go elsewhere. So he lost patients, lost some long-term patients, and then had to pull back. He still has a very, very tiny base of people who are considered concierge, but he had to go back, and at this point, I'm not even sure if he is going to pull back and maybe in a year or two really go full bore into the concierge or DPC market. But he absolutely did not handle it well, and as a result, it didn't bode well for either his practice or his patients.
Well, I was grimacing there, Catherine, as you said, the 3-page diatribe. I know one of the first things I tell people about marketing is whiff 'em. What's in it for me? And I think there's a tendency to make that mistake of talking all about yourself instead of talking so much about what's in it for the patient or what's in it for your customers. I'm curious, is there anyone that's gone really full bore into making the transition and still failed? Or what does it look like for someone that fully commits to transitioning, be that to hybrid or direct primary care or concierge? What ends up happening to them?
Well, we see a lot of those. Those are not uncommon. One of the stories that came in last year was a doctor who just didn't want to go into debt. He said, I came into this with, very clear intentions that I would not go $5 into debt. And, he was able to communicate to a new audience, which he was a relatively young physician, starting off with really no patients in his back pocket, no real experience in direct primary care. And he just said, I tried this for 6 weeks. I got 42 patients to sign up, but it's not enough to sustain my business operations over the course of the next year. So I'm going to go work for the HMO in my area. Another one, we see that's quite common is that, you should probably have, a lot of the consultants out there, and even a lot of the doctors, mostly the doctors themselves, will tell us, look, this is not for the faint-hearted. This is something that is, the patients you have to look out for are the one-and-done patients, because they take up an hour and a half of my time. They pay me for the initial, visit for that day, and essentially 1 month of membership. But then I never see them again, and they've taken up anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes of my time. And then I go to try and attract them again next month, and they aren't there.
So how have you seen physicians protect against that? If you're having that problem of patients coming in, say they come in, they just get their annual physical, and then they never come back again. How can either a DPC or a concierge physician prevent that from happening?
A lot of doctors have different ways of communicating. Keeping I think that kind of gets back to a lot of the messaging and having your staff also be good salespeople for your model. Most of these practices have 1 to 3 employees, but you need to have an employee population or staff essentially that believes in what you do and thinks that this is a really good deal too, and that they smile at the patients. And so I think it's about experience. It's about a number of things. It's about the doctor's bedside manner. It's about the staff experience. It's about how easy was it to get parking here. Did I have to go through bad traffic just to get here? Is it too close to is it not close enough to my office, or is it close enough to home? Female physician practices typically fill up a lot faster, and this is not just in concierge care or DPC. This is just medical marketing 101. Most female physician practices fill up a lot quicker than male practices do, because you have the healthcare CEO of the family, which is the mom, and they want to be on top of the pediatric care and the visits and what's going on with their kids. And so most likely they're going to determine who is the doctor in this area that our family is going to go to. So there are a number of factors that play into why these practices start and fail. It's not uncommon for doctors to work night shifts or day jobs and, have a few, cash paying patients on the side. And just to help them supplement their overall administrative costs to try and get this business up on the ground. We did an article, and I don't have the stats with me at the moment, but I'm sure if you go to our website, conciergemedicinetoday.com, you'll probably find that we wrote a lot of articles about franchising DPC or concierge care practice, and what the benefits and pros and cons of those types of relationships are, because there's definitely pros and there's some cons too. So But a lot of doctors, try to eliminate and try to avoid getting into more debt to start these practices, and that's something that they really need to consider.
One of the things, Taylor, that doctors should consider in their plan is what is their minimum enrollment in order to ensure, what is success in the mind of the doctor? What is the minimum enrollment that they need to have in order to sustain their business operations and then to have a platform upon which to build? And then secondly, what is their plan to secure new patients outside of their existing patient base? Most doctors think, well, I've got a panel of 2,500 patients, therefore I should have no problem securing 600-800 patients from that panel. Well, that may or may not be true, dependent upon the demographics of that panel, the percentage of Medicare you have, and so forth. So therefore, that may or may not be the case, and doctors need to look at what am I going to do in my community to help build a marketing funnel to help new patients come to see me that are outside of my existing patient base. And most doctors don't traditionally think that way.
Dig into that a little more. I know marketing is a big challenge that comes up for both Concierge and DPC. What are some of the most effective techniques you see in Concierge marketing?
There's not a one-size-fits-all for these types of practices. Everybody is different. And when you talk to the doctors themselves, as many as we have, they're all going to say something completely different than the other. Some will say that, I have been doing very well at Facebook, but at the same time, that doctor loves being on social media, and he's very charismatic, and, and he'll say, I got 50 patients that way since January 1. And then another doctor will say, I don't believe in Facebook. I don't even believe in social media. And I get all mine through patient referrals. Another doctor will say, I don't believe in marketing at all. I have a very high-end clientele, and marketing just doesn't work for them. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. But there is, a silver lining that does say that, look, if you do marketing and you do it well and you're communicating value and, essentially in your local market, and that's the thing that really, if there's anything that resonates among all doctors, it's that they need to keep things from a marketing perspective very local. They don't need to, advertise and put a big ad in a major newspaper in their metropolitan area. If they stick to the small papers and, they stick to communicating their message loud and clear, being very consistent in a local population, they're going to do very well. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, it also takes money to get your name out there. So they have to be aware of those things.
That reminds me of something one of my business mentors always said when he was asked how long it takes to build a business. He said, longer than you can imagine, but shorter than you can bear. And that's been true in my experience, and most of the people I've talked to kind of laugh when they hear that, and it's been true in their experience as well. I'm curious, though, for people you've talked to, and you've obviously got a pretty large sample size, is there kind of a mean or median time that you think when physicians are setting expectations or they're doing some financial planning that is reasonable for them to expect to transition or to start a practice?
6 to 18 months is what we hear from a lot of doctors, and I know that probably is going to, baffle a lot of people, but, for the most part, 6 to 18 months is a good time to help get your ducks in a row, start planning, start communicating and evaluating your local demographic, your local space, looking at your price points. But, we've heard as little as 18 weeks. We've heard 6 weeks. We've heard 3 years. But I think that if you look at a transition period of 6 to 18 months where you need to have some pretty clear expectations and pretty clear goals that, look, lower your expectations. You're probably not going to have a full panel by the time that you are dead set on having a full panel. So just be very, a lot of doctors now understand that and will tell you, look, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. It is also the hardest thing I've ever done in business. But, they surrounded themselves with a good team, and they got the job done, and their patients are better for it.
It's interesting how often the greatest thing I've ever done and the hardest thing I've ever done seem to go together. I always hear people talk about it, whether it's starting a new business or raising their children or making a big life transition. Those two kind of tend to overlap. From your perspective, is there something you feel like you're seeing maybe from a 30,000-foot level, an opportunity that other people are missing out on?
With the surge in high-deductible health plans, I think that learning and looking at ways in which the physician groups can work with self-insured employers is certainly an area of opportunity for the DPC concierge market. And some are availing themselves of that and beginning to look at ways in which, in models that can work with employers. But this is not just for the large multi-practice groups. This can be for the hometown doctor who wants to develop a relationship with the local manufacturing plant that's self-insured, because this type of care can render a level of care and prevention and even workers' compensation services that other programs don't have the capacity to offer. And I think that as we move forward, you're going to see some real innovation in that area, and I think that some influencers and some healthcare leaders are going to really look at ways in which and some already are, ways in which they can work directly with employers to help, keep patient satisfaction levels high, develop initiatives for wellness and prevention, and keep the costs manageable.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about that, Catherine. I know at the Direct Primary Care Conference in June, a lot of talk was going on there. If you're a local physician, though, how would you go about approaching a self-insured employer? Is there a way to get a list of those? How do you approach them? How does that process usually work?
Well, there's no cookie-cutter way that doctors are going after self-insured employers in their local market. That is something that I think that a lot of the industry leaders and some of the doctors out there who are good spokespersons for their practice and their models are trying to look at evaluating for the market as a whole. At this point, there are a few businesses that act as consultants that are also looking into how do we take what the direct primary care doctor does and take that to employers. And we've not heard back yet on the results of that, but we think that it's going to come back very positive from those contacts that we've got.
I think that also one way that physicians can find out if an employer is self-insured, generally speaking, if they've got 250 plus employees, they probably are self-insured, but you can find that very easily by calling the human resources department at the manufacturing plant or at the employer and asking the question if they're self-insured. And if they are, then they tend to be more open to more creative ways of working together to take care of their employee population and contain costs. And there was a physician who had contacted a well-known employer that had, I'm not sure how many they had, maybe 350 employees, and they're in the process of talking with them now about development of a pilot project or having an offering of their DPC practice as an option during their open enrollment.
Do you have any more of the details, Catherine, on how he approached that employer? Let's say I'm a physician right now in a similar situation and I want to go get into talks with some self-insured employers. How did he identify them? How did he start talking with them? Are there any sort of actionable takeaways there?
One of the things I would suggest to a physician is if you are in an area where you have a number of patients that come from a specific employer, look and see what positions they have. You may have some real influencers within that employer that are current patients of yours, and they can help perhaps give an entree to the decision makers, or at least formulate an introduction so that you could discuss the possibilities. But it's good to have a plan and a program in place that you can present to them as an option versus just going in and saying, hey, how can we work together?
Well, thank you, Catherine. That's a great tip. I know we're coming up on time here, so Michael, Catherine, if you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on and what's coming down the pipeline, we've enjoyed having you on the show.
Well, first off, our websites we have a few of them. One of them is conciergemedicinetoday.com, and on there you'll find news, information, legal news, legal opinions, white papers. We also have a bookstore and a resource center that has free materials, downloadable PDFs, infographics, as well as books, how-to books, anything from the Patient's Guide to Concierge Medicine to the Direct Primary Care Consumer Guide. The Marketing MD is also another new book that we just released that helps doctors look at those things that might be able to help them locally market their practice best and from a very affordable perspective. And also our other there's a lot of how-to resources and how-to articles on there as well, from not just from us, but also from consultants out there, from industry physicians, industry leaders, and other thought leaders. Other direct primary care side is the Direct Primary Care Journal, and that is at directprimarycare.com. And we have a list of physicians who are practicing in DPC, search a doc finder, so to speak, on there as well. Doctors can join each of these directories for a nominal annual fee. And again, they'll find lots of resources in our bookstore, free and very low-priced books. A lot of our most recent one, the Direct Primary Care Consumer Guide, has actually just been launched as of last week, I think. It hit the shelves of online retailers, and it's becoming already being purchased by doctors in bulk to be able to give to their patients as a educational resource to their patients who are kind of on the fence and not really sure whether or not they want to join this type of practice. Inside of that book, as well as the Patient Guide to Concierge Medicine, we have the 41 questions you should ask a direct primary care doctor, or the 50 questions you should ask a concierge doctor. So those are some of the things that we have available at our resource and news sites. But as far as upcoming what's coming down the pipeline for us, I'm actually traveling to California next week to be at a medical practice marketing conference, as well as a concierge medicine event that we're helping to be a part of and speak at and sponsor. And that's going to be very informative for the West Coast physician audience, as well as a time that the doctors can group together and talk about how their practice is going, some of the challenges that they might have, and just to really be able to learn about the industry from a very no agenda, independent perspective. We have some of the best doctors, best and brightest doctors, some of the grandfathers and others in the industry talking about concierge medicine and their practice and about how to market their practice. Mm-hmm. Well, the last item we have is we have a new doctor's guide to concierge medicine and direct primary care startup coming out in the next few weeks. And so we've been working on that for a couple of years now, and we have the physician audience, the physician contributors who have contributed to content to this work has been unmatched, and we're very excited about their contributions as well as our content contribution to the book, and we'll be publishing and authoring that coming out into the next several weeks. So look for that probably in the fall of this year at our website.
Well, that's exciting. It sounds like y'all got a lot both already released and also coming down the pipeline. I also wanted to mention, for anyone interested in learning more about either concierge medicine or direct primary care, Both CMT and the DPC Journal are great resources, and I subscribe to both the newsletters. So if you're looking for a way to kind of get a little bit of what's going on and stay abreast of the things that are changing and where the movements are headed, I recommend heading over and checking out their newsletters. So thank you everyone for listening. We will talk to you next week. And Michael and Catherine, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor.
Hey guys, this is your host, Taylor Pearson. To give you a little background on the show, after seeing my dad and sister, both physicians, struggle to find a good resource for how to transition from their traditional practices, I launched Concierge Medicine Radio to create a resource to help physicians and healthcare professionals launch, run, and grow patient-centered direct pay or concierge practices. If you enjoy the show and want to help us spread the word to other physicians and healthcare professionals, it really helps us out if you'll leave a review on iTunes. I know the iTunes interface is a little clunky to say the least, so we put together a quick guide on how you can leave us a review at conciergemedicineradio.com/review, or you can go to conciergemedicineradio.com and click Spread the Word.
Thanks for joining us today at Concierge Medicine Radio. If you found today's show valuable, we'd love it if you spread the word by leaving us a review on iTunes or sharing it with your friends. To see notes on today's show, please visit us at conciergemedicineradio.com. While you're there, leave us your email to hear about all upcoming episodes.